Russia's war in Ukraine has been one disaster after another, but what happened on January 19th might just be its dumbest move yet. Putin's forces, desperate for a breakthrough, came up with a plan so ridiculous it sounds like a bad joke. Storming Ukrainian defenses on motorcycles. Yep, you heard that right. In one of the most heavily fortified areas of the front, Russia sent 100 troops on bikes straight into Ukrainian drone and artillery fire. The result? A massacre. Out of all the soldiers in this bizarre assault, only one survived. Barely. How did Putin's military think this was a good idea? And why does Russia keep throwing its soldiers into suicidal missions? Let's break down this catastrophic blunder and what it says about Russia's crumbling war effort. The strategy for using motorcycles relied on speed, maneuverability, and the element of surprise. Regardless of the current state of the Donbass front and how little progress Russia has made over the past month or so, the numbers suggest that the Ukrainian army is likely still outnumbered and running into an equipment deficit to cover the entire battlefield. Russian military intelligence might have believed that using the quick-fire attacks spread over a larger area might have caused the Ukrainian defenses to become too thin at any particular point near the city of Siversk. Presumably, the Russian troops exhausted all other options to get into the city, as the surrounding hilly areas meant that any forces coming close to town would be visible to the Ukrainian military. Previous attempts at using mechanized infantry failed to get any meaningful results. Soldiers on foot would move too slowly through the rough terrain that surrounds the city. Infantry support vehicles, tanks, and other large vehicles couldn't navigate the hills, while also creating covering fire for the troops, not to mention that they were much more visible for both drones and conventional long-range optics. So the Russian forces devised an entirely different plan. By shedding heavy armor altogether, such as the aforementioned motorcycles, they hoped that the soldiers could cover enough ground in time to essentially provide Ukraine with far too many viable targets to choose from. Overwhelmed with quick-moving troops, the Ukrainian forces could have taken out most of the attackers, but they would have been compelled to bring in troops from somewhere else to do so, opening an opportunity for an attack there. Additionally, the motorcycles have another advantage: sheer speed. The most common drones that Ukraine is using to create killing zones are relatively low-range, medium-speed commercial drones, retrofitted with mine and ordnance carriers or advanced cameras. These first-person view drones typically don't have high speeds, with most models failing to move above 50 miles per hour. If most of the drones that Ukraine uses for these operations are relatively slow, at least compared to motorcycles, then there's some merit to the idea of using light, fast vehicles to literally outrun them. The presumption that speed and maneuverability were enough is partially supported by the fact that Russia still maintains a relatively healthy logistics operation in the area. The military could rapidly deploy soldiers to the area, creating a seemingly never-ending stream of troops, attempting to break or at least exhaust the Ukrainian defense. However, this plan had several problems from the start. First, it's unclear how much information the Russian military intelligence has on the actual equipment and capabilities of the Ukrainian troops stationed around the city. Former Colonel General Gennady Anashkin was dismissed from the army for falsifying the extent of the Russian losses and exaggerating their progress on the front. It's also likely that the field reports from the area, for which Anashkin was responsible, were also inaccurate. This could mean that the Russian forces were essentially jumping into the action partially blind or with a gross underestimate of the exact number of troops and drones that will be waiting for them in the defensive line around the city. This could explain, or at least attempt to explain, the fact that Russia used only 100 troops on January 19th. On the other hand, that would still make it one of the larger individual pushes for territory of the war. Regardless, there's also the fact that Russia has consistently had a numbers advantage, especially in terms of armored vehicles, artillery, and air forces. Even if the Russian air forces and artillery couldn't operate at their peak efficiency, since they haven't done so for a long while, that still leaves tanks and infantry support vehicles as the way that Russia could eke out an advantage. To shed that away for motorcycles and other barely armored vehicles seems counterproductive. Interestingly, this is far from the first time Russia decided to use motorcycles for this purpose. Previous operations that included mobile vehicles were conducted mostly in 2024, where a report from May suggested a similar strategy. At that time, the situation was arguably worse, as the vehicles used weren't motorcycles paired with infantry support or light armored vehicles, but instead modified golf carts and dune buggies. While the dune buggies technically have similar specifications to a motorcycle, higher speed, more maneuverability in rough terrain, the ability to transport more soldiers, they suffer from a similar issue: lack of armor. The open top of the buggy makes it relatively easy to use mine-carrying drones to annihilate the entire convoy of vehicles. This lack of armor is also likely why previous attempts have fared only somewhat better than this one, but still ended with utter defeat. A similar tactic was also used during the summer of 2024 during the offensive in Kharkiv. In that effort, the soldiers would use motorcycles to carry them part of the way before ditching the vehicles altogether and continuing either on foot or alongside infantry support vehicles. You already know how that attempt ended. The summer offensive was considered a colossal failure, with an estimated 70,000 losses on Russia's side in about 2 months of combat. Even worse, the summer campaign actually used armored vehicles alongside bikes, which theoretically improved the overall defenses and survivability. But this operation was no different. While Russia hoped that the motorcycles would be fast enough and attack in large enough numbers to make a difference, Ukrainian drones spotted them almost as soon as they started their engines. Recorded footage showed that even though Russia did use some infantry support vehicles, specifically BMP-2s, these were summarily removed by drones before the motorcycles could get far into the current front. After that, the drones could pick off soldiers one by one. The apparent lack of planning came into effect as Russian soldiers faltered and started panicking. While this led to erratic maneuvers from some soldiers seeking to evade drones and artillery fire, the panic also caused many to simply die faster as they got in each other's way. To rub salt in the wound, the Ukrainian counter-drone forces also successfully disabled the drones Russia hoped to use to provide support and cover fire, or at least an alternative target for the Ukrainians to focus on. This combination of the Russians being found out much faster than anticipated, without support options, and in vehicles that provide practically no defense against either gunfire or drones, means that there was really no other expected result from the entire debacle. In a way, it's surprising that a soldier managed to survive, albeit get caught by the Ukrainian military, rather than all of them just getting killed in action. So with previous instances of motorcycle-based warfare landing the Russian troops firmly 6 feet under, why did the military decide on this move again? Well, apart from a lack of information, it could be that the Russian military is desperate for a win in the area, which could stem from a few different factors. Militarily, the Russian advance hasn't been nearly as fast as Putin had hoped, especially given the monumental losses accrued over the previous year. While the offensive did manage to take over swathes of land in the last few months of 2024, Ukraine had also managed to retain some control over the Russian Kursk region and launch offensives on the neighboring ones. Ukraine, which was on the defensive for the first 2.5 years of the war, had actually managed to mount an offensive that took the Russian military by surprise. This meant that Russia had to divert some of its troops to repel the invasion, a move that came way too late to be useful, as the counteroffensive started only a month after the first Ukrainian soldier set foot in Kursk. As a result, Ukraine had practically free reign over Kursk, as it was met with minimal resistance from recruits who didn't have enough experience or equipment. The Kursk invasion led to a few more debacles, such as North Korea sending its own troops to Kursk and seeing them perform poorly, as expected. This further degraded Russia's reputation, and its military still had to set aside significant resources to try and retake Kursk regardless. It would seem that despite a numerical advantage, Russia hasn't managed to conduct warfare on multiple fronts. The newest desperate move of using motorcycles as cannon fodder likely indicates that the plan was to create a distraction for Ukrainian forces. Considering that the action failed horribly, it's safe to say that the plan went awry somewhere. Politically, Russia depends on maintaining an illusion of progress and dominance over Ukraine for its international alliances, but also to pacify its own population. The main rhetoric that the Kremlin had used throughout the war effort was that the special military operation in Ukraine was fully justified and that Russia was bound to win the conflict. This comes not only from the belief that Russia has a superior army, which it might have had at the start and squandered, but that it has a moral imperative and high ground to force Ukraine to rejoin Russia politically and culturally. With every passing month of the war, the illusion and the propaganda that the Kremlin has been peddling since day one has been getting thinner and thinner. Even if the main population centers are far from seeing actual combat, there are only so many recruits that Russia can get outside of them. Eventually, major cities will start seeing larger recruitment drives, which would call into question just how much the military has accomplished over the now 3 years of warfare. This leads to convoluted scenarios and reports where taking even villages or small towns counts as a success in Russia's books. And imagine if Russia's gamble paid off. To announce that the Russian forces managed to capture a town with soldiers riding into the battle on motorcycles would have likely given the Russian population a significant morale boost, as it would imply that the Ukrainians couldn't even handle the Russian soldiers outside of modern armored vehicles. It would have been hailed as one of the most ingenious plans to have been concocted throughout the war, and the military would have been riding that wave of popularity for possibly months. Strategically, Russia also has the best logistical network in Donbass in regions close to the city of Seversk. This makes it possible that the Russian military intelligence might not have seen this act as one of desperation, as troops could be shuttled into the region relatively quickly. For the Russian military, this could have been seen as a calculated gamble based on the potential military and political gains we mentioned before. However, the arguable logistical advantage that Russia has in the region is getting smaller and smaller. This is due to Ukraine using more advanced drone systems than ever, which we'll discuss later, but also somewhat contradictory due to the progress the Russian forces have made elsewhere. If the Russian military does manage to secure a stretch of land and occupy it, it's likely a product of losing hundreds of soldiers who would need to be rapidly replaced by incoming troops. However, if Russia isn't careful, it can stretch its own forces too thin to be useful, and capturing a town could lead to an expansion of the front that Russia isn't prepared to handle right at that moment. We also have to add the fact that Ukraine has been using long-range strikes more and more often in the last few months. This came not only from the country's development of long-range kamikaze drones, but also from the approval from the US and NATO, permitting them to use some of the donated weapons inside Russia's territory. These strikes are being conducted on vital manufacturing, industrial, stockpiling, and logistical centers in regions surrounding Ukraine. They have allowed Ukraine to cut off some of Russia's advances at the route by demolishing roads and bridges to turn Russia's infrastructure against it. But a big part of why the newest Russian attempts to make headway into Ukraine have stumbled has been due to the latter's improvement in drone warfare. When the war in Ukraine actually started, the concept of drone warfare was much different, with drones typically being multi-use surveillance and precision strike tools. A drone would fly around targets and then launch a single explosive payload to destroy it. The sheer scale of the war changed the equation to favor numbers, leading to both Russia and Ukraine retrofitting commercial drones for either surveillance or single-use strikes. The commercial drones in question turned out to be deadly, despite how silly they may have looked or sounded in reports. However, the early drones faced several obstacles, with range and speed being bottlenecks in their deployment. Traditional commercial drones can rarely function a few miles away from the control center, which provides the instructions and can seldom achieve speeds comparable to even land vehicles. While they were faster than humans on foot, which was likely the reason they were feared by both Ukrainian and Russian infantry, they still needed to surprise vehicles or drop mines and grenades from above to prevent detection and countermeasures. But Ukraine has also been developing dozens of military drone models. While the designs blend a bit, after all, you can create a flying device in only so many ways, the standout features that separate the new drones from retrofitted commercial ones are exactly their speed and range. Long-range drones can have ranges in hundreds of miles, hitting targets well into Russian territory thanks to GPS guidance systems and unassisted remote control. Similarly, even first-person view drones have been getting faster and more capable. The Wild Hornets Drone Workshop has released a video and a report of a quadcopter drone capable of accelerating to speeds around 200 miles per hour, well over what military vehicles and even most cars and motorcycles can achieve. Even if the Wild Hornets are not yet going to make their debut in the war, some other drones can already achieve speeds of over 100 miles per hour. At that point, there's really no land vehicle that can reach enough speed to outrun a drone and provide protection for the soldiers in case a drone does manage to catch up or have enough carrying capacity and maneuverability to make the soldier operating it be something more than just a driver with a gun holstered to them. So what will Russia do next? That's difficult to say. The fact that the military has attempted to cross an active battlefront with motorcycles shows dangerous levels of improvisation and risk-taking. Usually, this would be a cause for celebration for the Ukrainians, as desperate measures would usually mean that Russia has run out of effective tactics to use. However, Putin has been dangling the use of nuclear weapons and nuclear-capable ballistic missiles practically since the start of the war. In late 2024, Russia actually launched a long-range missile that was theoretically capable of reaching as far as North America, all in an attempt to score some wins for the military. If Russia keeps losing, especially in silly ways due to ill-conceived plans like this one, there's no telling how that could affect Putin's decision-making. He could start believing that NATO won't retaliate for Russia using a nuclear bomb against Ukraine, given the so-called moral high ground that the Kremlin is still focusing its propaganda on. If that happens, the war could be cut short and replaced with a nuclear one, in which case it's not only Russia and Ukraine that are at risk, but the world as a whole. Of course, it's also possible that NATO sees the efforts Russia has made over the past month as ultimately futile and redoubles its efforts to arm Ukraine through donations of advanced weaponry, calling Putin's bluff on using nukes. If long-range drones or missiles move closer to actually dropping on Moscow, it would reverse the entire rhetoric that the war was built on and could cause Putin to finally lose support from within and bring meaningful change to the country's leadership. Regardless, one thing's for certain. Ukraine should celebrate these kinds of desperate plans, as it means that Russia is wasting away precious resources for pretty much no gain. It only serves to bridge the monumental numbers gap that the country started with. But what do you think? Will Russia manage to do something even more stupid soon, or are their desperate moves a potential sign that the war is nearing its end? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for watching.